Good evening. How are you all doing today? Doing pretty good. Have a good 4th of July. Is everybody safe with fireworks and have a good time? No? Yeah. My sister got some from a neighbor who has access to some stuff, and we didn't really realize what it was going to be until we lit it and, and shot off in the air, and it was a full-on firework. So if you guys don't know who I am, a lot of you probably do, but my name is Graydon. I'm normally the youth leader. I'm normally in the back with the teenagers. I have the opportunity to teach for the next 5 teachings. Next week, Dustin, I'm correct, and next week is no church, right? No service next Wednesday. So we're doing construction here. I don't know exactly what we're doing, but yeah, so the church is down for a little bit, and so we'll have a little bit of a break. I'm going to be teaching the first 4 chapters of Daniel. Only the first chapter tonight, one a week while I'm teaching. I'm not that ambitious. But I'll be honest, I'm a huge fan of the book of Daniel. I was just talking about this before church with Tirza, Chris's daughter. I love these books of the Bible where you just see people who are faithful, serving the Lord, and God takes care of them through hardship, and God just blesses them. And I find it kind of inspirational. Daniel also has a lot of really cool visions and dreams. There's a lot of prophecy. So much so that there is some people who try to dispute when this book was written because it just does such a good job of laying out what's going to happen. But obviously, Jesus quoted this book, so I'm good with it. Jesus is good with it. So I think that's it. I think it's time to jump right in. So I'm doing this a little different than I've ever done before, so bear with me if there's any technical difficulties of this PowerPoint. Can you guys see good over here? Should I move back? Are you guys good to go? All right. So let's jump right in. I'm going to be reading from ESV, that version, if you guys would like to join me. It's going to be up here if you'd like to read along. But let's jump right in. Verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand and some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So since we're kind of jumping right into a book, I'm going to try to give some context real quick. This just is a quick reminder of kind of the timeline of Old Testament history. You guys remember there's the Exodus from Egypt when the Jews are led out by God, and they, after some time in the desert, eventually make it into the Promised Land. And after sort of just kind of have an anarchy for a while with these judges, God, they request a king. God sends them the king Saul, and he doesn't turn out to be the best. After that, they get a king David, and after him, David's son was a successful king, but not really in the ways that mattered. And then after Solomon, the kingdom is divided into 2, right? There's a northern kingdom of Israel with 10 of the tribes, and a southern kingdom of Judah with only 2 of the tribes, Judah and Benjamin. So things just go downhill from there. So much so that there was numerous warnings from God. Finally, Babylon comes and takes Judah captive. So this all took place about 600 BC, so 600 years before Christ. And real quick, just for more context, who are these people? So first up, we have Jehoiakim, king of Judah. This is when he reigned, 609 to 598 BC. Didn't reign for a very long time. His father Josiah was a very good king. He was actually one of the kings that it talks about that he did it right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in all the ways of David, his father. But his son Jehoiakim was not a very good king. He's the king that Jeremiah often is fighting with and having issues with. He's one of the last kings of Judah. And the other main character we're talking about, which Jehoiakim doesn't show very much in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar does. I like these pictures. I thought they looked good. I don't know. He looks pretty impressive in this one. But he's kind of the guy that put Babylon back on the map. He was a great war leader and builder. He built the Hanging Gardens, which there's some debate whether or not they ever existed in reality. But conquered many nations, built the Ishtar Gate. I'll show you some of these things. These are obviously artists, interpretation of what they looked like. They didn't have pictures back then. But, one of the 7 wonders of the world. He built it for his wife, supposedly, who missed the hills of her homeland. This is the Ishtar Gate. They've restored it. This is like, you could go visit this. It actually looks, that's like beautiful, right? So, got all these bricks that are, painted or whatever, glazed. And this is kind of what that whole area looked like at the time. So in your head, this was built a little bit after Daniel shows up, but in your head, when you think of Daniel in Babylon, this is kind of what we should be thinking about, this kind of a place, and it should look something like that. So anyway, back to verse 2. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. It's important to remember through this whole thing that God is the one that gave Judah into the hand of Babylon. All these things that are taking place are because God willed it to happen, right? And why did God want this to happen? So this all took place because of the great sin of the nation, right? If you don't remember your Old Testament history, when God gave the promised land to the nation of Israel, there were some conditions attached. Here's an example. Deuteronomy 28, 58 through 59. If you are not careful to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, the Lord your God, then the Lord will bring on you and your offspring extraordinary afflictions severe and lasting, and sickness and grievous and lasting. There's a lot of strict warnings that if you follow the Lord, or there was all these blessings available if you just seek after God, if you follow after His law. But there, on the other hand, there was all these curses that were waiting for the people if they rebelled against Him. And specifically, Deuteronomy 28:63 says, "And you shall be plucked off the land that you are entering to take possession of." They were specifically warned that if this goes on long enough, you guys will be taken out. You don't just keep this land forever. The land belongs to the Lord. And needless to say, Israel didn't follow God's commands very long, honestly. While Moses was around, they did all right. There's still a lot of rebellion. While Joshua, the same kind of thing. But it didn't take long. You read Judges, you read some of the atrocities that took place. There wasn't really long before there was rape, murder, child sacrifice. It was some pretty terrible stuff started to happen. And as a result, this nation was plucked away from the promised land. Over and over and over again, God had given them protection. We read over and over how God had given them victory in battle against people who were trying to, capture them or siege them. And, all these armies came and failed. But finally, it was enough, and God withdrew that special protection, right? They wanted those benefits of a relationship with God, but they really didn't want to actually have a relationship, They had kind of cheated, quote unquote, on God one too many times, and they finally were facing the consequences. So verse 3, "Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans." So this wasn't very uncommon back then, and honestly makes a lot of sense, right? Take the children of the royal family, nobility as hostage and servants, right? This makes sense for a couple reasons. Number one, these were kind of the best of Judah. They were probably some of the healthiest and most educated people in Judah. Back then, more so than now, you had people who, there was a stark contrast between the rich and the poor. If the wealthy were able to, adequately feed their children, the wealthy were able to, properly educate them. They were able to, these kids didn't grow up under hard labor like the poor did. So it kind of makes sense that if you're looking for the best people to take back with you, the children of the wealthy, the nobility, the royals, family, those are the people to take. Another reason this would cripple Judah's future, right? As a nation, the people who were like the most promising bright stars that were going to supposedly take over from their parents, they're gone, right? That's been stripped away. And another reason is these were the children of the people who ran Judah, right? So if Judah decided, the people who were left, if they decided to maybe try to rebel again against Babylon, they would very quickly remember where their kids were at, right? Some of the leadership, I'm sure, would think, man, if I do anything, he's going to kill my son. So this was not an uncommon thing, and it kind of, from a military strategic point of view, it makes sense. So they take all these kids, they command them to be trained and serve in the palace. Verse 5, here we go. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Now, finally introducing kind of the main characters of this, right? These are the people that we're going to be talking about a lot throughout this book. These are 4 youths. There was obviously more than that who were taken, but these feature prominently in the story. They're ones that will excel exceptionally. Now, all these youths were taken, and they were educated for 3 years, like it says, to stand before the king. So for 3 years, these kids, and that's really what they were youths, they were kids, they were teenagers, probably at best. They were to be 100% indoctrinated with their culture, their language, and their religion. The obvious hope is that because they're young and they are brought up in this system, that they're going to leave behind their old life and they will assimilate in fully into the culture. They had them, come in, they changed their names, they changed their language, changed their culture, changed religion. They're really trying to 100% make them loyal to their kingdom. And I know I just already said it, but the fact that they changed their names, right? Like, this is very much on purpose. Daniel, which means God is my judge, becomes Belteshazzar, which means Bel's prince, which is a pagan god. Hananiah, which means beloved by the Lord, becomes Shadrach, which means illuminated by sun god. Mishael, which means who is as God, becomes Meshach, which means who is like Shach, another pagan god. Azariah, which means the Lord is my help, becomes Abednego, which means servant of Nego, which, once again, another pagan god. Their very names pointed to their roots as a Jew. Their very names pointed towards God, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, and they pointed those things in another direction, trying extremely hard to get them to just forget their old identity. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. I'll be honest, there's so much to say about this verse. I didn't know had a hard time to choose where to start. But let's just start with Daniel's obedience. I'm just so impressed with Daniel, honestly. He's in a hostile, scary place. Like, literally, his life has been turned upside down. He's been kidnapped. His name has been changed, taken away from his family. They're trying to change everything about him. And the only reason that he's there is because of sin of kind of other people, right? It wasn't Daniel's personal sin that made him go there. It wasn't that these youth were extra sinful that God sent them away. No, this is the sin of the nation. It would have been extremely understandable if Daniel would have been in this situation and basically had said, like, God, why? I'm over this. Like, you're not real. You're supposed to be taking care of me, and I'm in Babylon now. It would have been something that we could see, right? It would have been understandable. Many people in a position like Daniel's in, they go through hardship, and a lot of times it's not their fault, and they blame God for it, right? They see stuff that's going on, and they're like, if you're a God of love, why would this happen to me, right? But all of these kids who we're going to see clearly love God. They're all taken against their will, and despite all of that, Daniel still purposed in his heart that he's going to serve the Lord, that he's not going to defile himself. I'll be honest, I'm just in awe of it. I'm very much impressed. I read some of these heroes of the Bible, and I just know myself, like, man, if I was in that position, like, I don't know if I would have been so just gung-ho to do things the right way. Like, it's very, very impressive. And, obviously God is with Daniel. We'll see that. I'm sure God is giving him strength and faith. But, there's a reason there's a book in the Bible called Daniel. He was an extraordinary guy. So he sees the king's food and drink, and he decides he doesn't want it. Now, like it said, this was a portion taken from the king's own food and his own wine. I'm sure the food was great. I'm sure the wine was delicious. I'm sure, it was just everything your flesh, your mouth would desire. But Daniel didn't care about that, because to him, the food would spiritually defile him or pollute him, right? It would corrupt him in his mind. And so, why did Daniel think this? Well, I can think of a couple reasons. Number one, some of the food might not have been kosher, right? There was a lot of strict dietary laws of the Jews that they were supposed to follow. They weren't allowed to have shellfish, which I'm okay with that. I don't like shellfish. They weren't allowed to have pork, which I disagree with that one. I love bacon and all of that stuff. But wine was kosher, and he still didn't want that. So, I think there was more than that going on. Another reason was this food and drink was most likely sacrificed to idols and to other gods. Often, I think it's one of those things that people might not realize, and probably most of you do, but when animals were sacrificed to gods, sometimes the entire body would be burnt, but most of the time, a portion of it would be given to the god, and everyone else would feast on most of the meat. It was kind of like a big barbecue. So it wouldn't be surprising if they first poured out the blood, they killed the animal, poured out to some deity, and then they cooked the rest of the food, and everybody ate together. And most of these meals or feasts from the king were probably offered up to these other gods. If that's the case, then it makes sense that Daniel was kind of like, I don't want any part of this. I want to serve the one true God, and I literally saw this thing, slaughtered to Bel or whatever. And another reason, third reason I can think of is, culturally it was very common for when people ate together, there was an idea of communion. That's the whole reason we do communion with Jesus. Today when we take communion is when you eat something with other people, you kind of are bound together. That's the idea, right? You're eating the same nutrients. From this apple goes to me, that goes to you, or that whatever, and now we're kind of like joined as one a little bit. So it would make sense, again, for Daniel to try to separate that and keep himself separate. And so Daniel, all of the stuff is going on. They're trying to change him, and he's resisting, right? He's seeing this cultural thing that they're trying to push him into all of this, and he doesn't like it. So verse 8 again. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. So this is quite a request, right? This is actually quite brave. The whole point, I feel like we've established this, but the whole point of what's going on is that these kids are supposed to be brought in, supposed to get in line, supposed to be indistinguishable than another Babylonian youth. They're supposed to be fully segregated. Desegregated. Integrated. And Daniel's sitting there and he's saying, you know what, I don't want to do that. If I can, I don't want to do this. And so he's trying to put up this barrier between what the Babylonians want and what he believes God wants, right? Now, let's be honest, this is something that we can definitely learn from and apply today. We live in a culture today, in a world today that is vastly different than the culture described in the Bible, right? Vastly different than God's culture. Our culture is different, our ethic is different. What we consider right and wrong is often at odds with what the world thinks, right? And you guys know how it is. You watch the news, you read books, you look on the internet, whatever. There's people on all sides, all over the place, who are trying to force their culture on other people, right? We as Christians, when we look at the internet, look at the news, look at whatever, it's pretty often that we see things that are contrary to what God is really trying to get us to do, right? When Jesus was born as a man, his culture didn't match the religion of the day, right? The Pharisees killed him for it. It didn't match then, and it doesn't match now, right? Jesus' culture doesn't match the world's culture. It doesn't match American culture or any political party's culture. And sadly, some churches, it doesn't match their culture, right? There are many areas that when we look out there, they're completely backwards. Here's an example verse of that same thing. Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Right? When we look out there in the world, we see a lot of this. So what do we do about it, right? Romans 12:21 says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And Daniel's example here helps us with this as well, I believe, right? He didn't rebel, he didn't attack, he requested change. He responded by excelling. We're going to see coming up here that they were some of the best, and they did it the right way, right? Spoilers a little bit, but this evil is going to be overcome by good. And so we can learn from that, right? We should be praying for our nation. We should be praying for our leadership, praying for our government. And just like it says in Romans here, overcome evil with good. Abraham Lincoln has a famous quote, "A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall," right? If we want to have a chance of changing people's minds or doing any of this stuff, the only way that's going to happen is if we're seeking the Lord and we're overcoming evil with good. Daniel 9 through 10. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs, and the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, "I fear my lord, the king, who assigned your food and your drink, for why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king." It doesn't say here specifically, but I believe that Daniel was probably praying this whole time. We see it throughout the rest of this book that Daniel is always seeking the Lord. I'm sure that he went before the Lord during this whole thing and, it basically was like, "God, I'm about to ask that I don't have to defile myself. I don't think you want me to do this. Like, please give me favor and compassion." And, I believe that God honored that, right? He asked that, give me a chance to not defile myself like this. And I'll be honest, I think this is another guess. You can disagree with me, but we can see coming up that they were extremely successful. These youths, they had better understanding, better wisdom. I believe their work ethic was probably some of the best, and I think that helped a lot get the compassion that he needed. Right? I'm sure this group had caused no trouble beforehand. I'm sure they didn't throw a fit about everything. I'm sure they were excelling. So when he came and said, "Hey, I've done everything you ask, but I can't do this," I'm sure that went a long way with the chief of the eunuchs. Their witness made it easier for him to accept that request. It's very important for us to stand our ground on the things that matter, right? But let's not ruin our witness by arguing with everything all the time. To quote Romans 12:21 again, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Here are some other verses that really nail this point down. Matthew 10:16, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as servants and innocent as doves." And Romans 12:18, "If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all." When we see the injustice, we see the corruption, all the straight evil in the world, there's a tendency in us to want to attack. There's a tendency that want us to fight. But that's really not the game plan that's laid out for us in the Bible. I'll be honest, I feel like this is a subject that is sort of advanced Christianity a little bit. I feel like it's moving past Christianity 101. Christianity 101 is not defiling yourself, trying to stay away from this stuff, but it really is another level to respond to evil with good. It really is hard sometimes, right? An example of this is, when Jesus was taken, after Judas kissed him, betrayed him with a kiss, he whips out a sword and chops off a guy's ear, right? And we know how that turns out. Jesus rebukes him. He says, Luke 21:51, "But Jesus answered, 'No more of this,' and he touched the man's ear and healed him." It's easy to try to stand up for God's culture when it matches our emotions, right? Our flesh, when we see the corrupt things, it's easy to stand up and say, that is wrong, right? But our flesh, when it sees that same stuff, it's hard for us to have love and compassion and reach out and try to fix things with good. If we don't, and this is the thing that I hope I'm really conveying here, as much as we want to say that God's culture is not defiling, as much as we want to say God's culture is, we don't do these things, God's culture is also in the response, right? Jesus' culture, when he said, is go the extra mile, right? Jesus' culture was turn the other cheek. Jesus' culture was overcome evil with good. And if we're not doing that, if we are only doing the part that's easy and feels good to do, then it's not really our culture that we're living. It's not really God's culture we're living. It's our culture, right? It's what we want. But God's culture takes us that extra step, and that's the hard part, right? Daniel chapter 1, 11 through 14. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. So Daniel proposes a test. It's, give us 10 days. That's all I'm asking for, right? If everything is okay, then let us keep doing it. If something's wrong, we'll go back to the meat. This is a very wise, choice by Daniel. Good idea. And it makes sense, right, that the chief of the eunuchs was hesitant to do this. His whole job was to make sure that these servants were strong and able to serve, right? And so if all of a sudden half of them were like scraggly and not able to do anything and weak, then he'd be the one in trouble. So he has a legitimate fear. He's just asking them, is water and vegetable enough? I don't know about this. And there's real risk here, but once again, God had given him compassion and favor. So like I said, Daniel's smart about this. Reevaluate, see how things are. Validated learning is a good thing, right? Trying to make sure that this chief eunuch is making his decision based on facts and not just fears, right? Wisdom. So the chief of the eunuchs agrees to do it. Verse 15. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And so, wouldn't you know it, they look healthier than the other servants. God is blessing their obedience. They look great. The chief of the eunuchs is convinced. He allows them to do this, and they no longer had to defile themselves. God had provided a way. And example of that, 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. There's always a choice. There's always a way of escape. God also provides that. No matter what we face, there's always a choice. And so we kind of just have to find that way out, right, sometimes. Daniel asks for a way out. Please, can I not do this? God blesses his obedience, and he's allowed to. Daniel obviously very easily could have thought, well, I got no choice. These are the rules. What are they going to do? Kill me? Like, I can't do anything, right? But he was brave, and he stood up, and he requested, did it the right way, right? Went before his boss and asked for things to change. He stepped out in faith, and God provided a way for them to be able to endure. And then, like it says again, at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So let's talk about the meat and wine itself for a second here. I'll be honest, and I kind of touched on it a minute ago, but I've never seen someone slaughter a cow in front of me, pour the blood out to Satan, and then hand me a steak or a hamburger from that cow, right? I've never been in that situation, so I can only guess at what I'd feel like. But if it was just the meat or vegetables option, I think it's pretty obvious what the choice would be. I would much rather have prime beef instead of vegetables. But for Daniel, it was also an easy choice. For him, he thought the obvious choice was not to defile himself. So how do we handle issues like this, where I feel like I'd be okay with the steak, but Daniel doesn't want it, right? Well, the Bible addresses this directly, so let's talk about that. 1 Corinthians 8:4-8. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and that there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom all things and for all whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. However, not all possess this knowledge, but for some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. So the reality of the situation is there's only one God. There is no other gods out there. There is no gods in Babylon. They didn't really exist. The people who were making the sacrifice were obviously deceived. In reality, this meat was just meat, right? The wine was just wine. But the key here, again, is Daniel's conscience. Like he says, but through former association with idols, they eat the food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. And Daniel, to his credit, which is totally fine, he wanted nothing to do with the religion of Babylon. He wanted to be fully devoted to God, and it bothered him, right? I'm sure it felt like a compromise to him where he was partaking of this, and it just bothered his soul and it bothered his mind. To him, eating that food that belonged to other gods was partaking with these other gods, and so for him, he should not take it, right? There are many situations in life like this. This might sound out of left field a little bit or whatever, but the kids in the youth group will laugh at me because I use this stuff as an example all the time. But I love my wife so much, I would hate to ever do anything that would hurt our relationship. And, there are many men out there like me. They love their wives. They want to do everything in their power to make sure that things are great, and they never want to betray their wife's trust. They understand that they're one flesh with their wife, and anything that would hurt her would hurt them. And, like I said, this is related. Hang in there. None of us would ever want to have an affair or cheat or do anything like that to betray our wife. But let's be honest, something like that normally this doesn't just happen out of nowhere. This is normally a long path that is taken before something like that happens. And so these questions of consciousness, or your consciences, the question a lot of times is how far down that path is okay, right? The end, very clearly sin, right? At the end, don't want to go over there. But, for one husband to even have, another woman's phone number in their phone might be terrible. Might be a bad thing for them, right? For another, they might go to lunch with a coworker who's a girl and it's not a big deal. Or even for another person, they might have, some girls' phone numbers and they text sometimes and whatever, and nothing ever happens. But for me, I normally try to stay pretty far away from that end of the road. But there might be things that I do that people look at me and think like, man, I can't believe he's doing that. I can't believe he's talking to her. I can't believe whatever. And I think nothing of it. Or I look at other people and I might think, I would never do that. A husband shouldn't do that. And, there's obviously that point where things are too far. I'm not talking about straight sin. Don't misunderstand me. But back to this example, for Daniel, it was sin for him to eat of this meat and drink of this wine, right? For Paul, apparently, it wasn't. He was said as, we are no worse off if we do not eat, or better if we do. Paul didn't care. Daniel did. And, Romans 14:23, but whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, because the eating is not from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. Whatever we find ourselves doing in life, there's lots of different situations. I just gave an example, but there's a lot of different situations where we might be there and we might be just, something might make us uneasy, right? Something that's like, okay, I don't really feel good about this. I feel like I'm pushing things a little bit. There's that internal dialogue where you kind of go like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And if that pops up at all, we need to stop, right? We need to get out of there. If we feel like we're walking that tightrope where I'm okay where I'm at, but that's a bad place to be. And so, like he says, it is sin. Whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats, right? We're all going to stand before God someday. We're all going to go before him, and it's important that we can do it with as clean of a conscience as possible, right? Verse 17. As for these youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of Cyrus. So God continues to bless the obedience of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They continue to seek the Lord. They continue to put their nose down and grind. I truly believe that they were just out there doing things the right way, right? You don't accidentally gain wisdom and understanding. I believe that they were working and doing their best. And I love, like I said, these stories inspire me personally. I love when I read these stories like Joseph, like Daniel, who were in these terrible situations but still sought the Lord, still tried to do things the right way, still faithfully followed after God, and God blesses them. Most of us work in the world, most of us work in jobs around people who are, have a different culture than us, let's just be honest. We need to try to make the same sort of choices that Daniel and the other youths make here all the time. And I just want to end on this, Philippians 2:14 through 15. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. We really have this opportunity, right? We are in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, right? Like, I don't think anybody would probably dispute that with me. But everything we find ourselves doing, everything that we do in the world, we will be seen one way or the other. And if we do things without grumbling or disputing, doing things the right way, being blameless and innocent, we can be those, it's like it says, among whom you shine as lights in the world. We really have an opportunity. We really, really do. There are a lot of people, I see it over and over and over again. There are so many people who do not understand what Christianity is about. They really don't get it. I talk to people, I see stuff on the internet, whatever. You see these people talking, and most of them have never seen what real Christianity is. They've only seen people getting, rebuked or yelled at or just trashed, and that, self-sacrificing love of Jesus Christ has not been shown to a lot of people. And there is a real opportunity, if we do things this way, that we can be that light in the world, right? We can point people towards the Savior that literally, was made fun of on the cross, and he still chose to die for those people, right? Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they do. I mean, that was Jesus' response when these people were trashing him as he's literally being crucified. And so that is the culture. That is the mark that we should be heading towards. I don't know. It just really, really kind of excites me, kind of intimidates me a little bit. But there is this opportunity, and it's just such a cool thing to think about of like, man, God, I just want to do things the right way. I want to be this light. I want to stand out in a good way. I don't want to be the person people complain about at work. I want to be the person that people think, why are they different? Why are they so, why are they so nice? Why are they so loving? So we're going to stop there. That is the end of Daniel chapter 1. Only went over by 1 minute, so pretty good. So let's pray. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much for this book, Lord. Like I said, it inspires me, God. I just pray for all of the people here and myself, Lord. I pray that you give that, the Holy Spirit to us, Lord, to enable us to do your will and to shine this way, God. I pray that you give us the same faith, Lord, that Daniel had, that, even when he was going through hardship, he still never turned away from you, Lord. I pray that you bless us and just take care of us this week. Give us opportunities, Lord. And we just thank you for your word and your goodness, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.